was called to work then at Concordia to teach chemistry. And when he was teaching chemistry, they considered that a needed job. They were deferring people in those days if they were doing something that might be war related. Now they considered his teaching chemistry as being war related. So they kept him on there, and he taught there for a couple of years. And within that time, um, now let's see. Oh, they kept deferring him. He get to though he could have another 6 months, and they kept deferring him. The school was wanting him to stay there at the school. The draft board wanted him to go into the army, and he was in the middle here, and they were fighting with each other. The school wanted him to stay there because they couldn't get a chemistry teacher, and most of the teachers, a lot of them were ministers who were teaching in that school, and but they were trying to get another teacher who would teach chemistry, and they kept waiting, and finally they got a woman who was not going to be drafted, who was a chemistry teacher. So Harold had no excuse anymore. the school, the school had no excuse to have to keep him then because they could get a chemistry teacher, a woman. 20, 21. He was well. He could. They would. You could go went into the army at 18. We were very much up in the air in those days because we couldn't really plan ahead, not knowing what was coming. You did what you had to in those days, Karen. You couldn't really plan ahead, but always behind him was he was going to be called into the service. And we knew that there was no getting away from that he was going to be called into the service. Uh, but when you never knew. It was everybody's lives were up in the air in those days. He was there 2 years, I guess, and then he finally was called.
Oh, okay. So where were you guys? Like, were you married at that point?
Oh no,
You weren't
no,
married?
no,
Okay.
we weren't married then.
Okay.
But we got married during that time when he was teaching there and I was teaching in Franklin Square.
Okay.
That's when we were married.
And then where did you live at that point?
Well, he had to be there as a dorm supervisor,
Oh,
and I had a job. So we only lived together on weekends.
yeah.
You did what you had to in the war times. I mean,
Yeah.
that was we couldn't live. I couldn't be, teaching where I was, and he couldn't be teaching where he was.
Yeah.
So, so on weekends we lived together.
Wow.
But I was still teaching, even though he was in the army. Then I was teaching because he had to go through all this basic stuff, and I could not be with him. But in those days, the whole country was put together, not like we are today, so spread out. Everything went to war effort. We were in the war by that time, you see, and he at least was able to finish college. I guess maybe because he had been a teacher before, they kept him there in the cadre, which was teaching the new recruits coming in. So he would be teaching the chemical war. He was in the chemical
Oh,
section of the army.
okay.
He was in chemical warfare,
Wow.
and he would teach. He would teach what needed to be done in that. That's what he was doing, and
Huh.
they kept him there.
Okay.
And when my vacation came up in June, I took a bus, a train. I took a train to Alabama, and we were together then for the weekend, for the summer,
Oh.
2 months.
Oh.
in order to get down to Alabama, I had to take a train. Uh, Now, the trains were very crowded because servicemen were on the trains. People like me were going places. So trains were very crowded. I remember going to Alabama. There wasn't any seat. I sat on a suitcase part of the time. I sat on my suitcase. If you wanted to be together, you did anything you had to be together because we were all that age, and all my girlfriends were home, and our our men were going off to war. It, you took your happiness where you could. This was that first year. Uh, I He got a room for me with a very nice couple that I could live with. Uh, but it wasn't boarding. I still had to have meals. I had to eat. I always could eat a lot. I lived down there in this with this couple, and what I would do, he'd go off early in the morning because he had to be back at camp. So he would go off, and I would stay there, and then he would come home uh, like at dinner time. He was able to get away from camp, be able to go away from camp because he was through with his basic training at that time. Uh, so what I would do, I would walk into town uh, from where these people lived that I stayed with, and I would go into five at Woolworths. It was Woolworths. But this was a nice town. It was a city, really, Gadsden, Alabama. So I would walk into town. Now I had to pay for meals, of course, then. So what I would do, I would go in like late morning so I could have brunch. And I'd sit at the counter. They had counters then at in the and I would have a meal then. But he would be able to come home and we would go out. We'd had to go out to have our dinner out someplace. We had to walk there. We had no cars. Any place we went, we had to walk. Uh, but we were young then, you see. uh, so I would, he would, there was a place that was close enough from where I was living then, where I was staying, and he would come there, and then we'd walk over to this place, and it was well, they didn't have fast food places then. They, those were not. They didn't have those in those days. But this was a place that had hamburgers and hot dogs and you know that kind of stuff. So we usually went there, and they'd have like fried chicken and the only place you could eat was at this counter. I mean, there weren't tables and chairs or anything there. If you wanted to eat there, and it was cheap, I'll tell you that. It, you could get a decent meal. So we would go out and eat there. And then he would be able to stay then with me overnight until, and then he would have to go back early in the morning to get back to camp. Well, you did what you had to if you wanted to be together. We were a young married couple. We wanted to be together naturally. So you anything that made that doable, that's what we did. I did that for all that summer, all of that's from July till the middle of till September. So we didn't have much money either in those because you see, you had to have ration books to eat either in a restaurant or to buy food at anything. You had to have that many. Yeah, you had to eat any place. You had to have a ration book. Now, since Harold was in the army, he didn't get a ration book because he could eat all his meals at the army. The army would feed him. But the meals that he ate out with me, we paid for, but he didn't have. So we were eating on one ration book. When you're in love like that, you do what you have to do. No, we had enough to eat. We ate in places that were inexpensive, like this, as I say, and we'd say, "What? How much money have we got now? Can we have one or two hamburgers tonight?" So you see, when we were first married, it was not like when you guys were first married, but we we just had a room in someone's home, and
Wow.
and had to have meals out and whatnot.
Wow. So how was it living in Alabama?
I prefer New York.
Wow.
Well, it was very different.
Yeah.
It was very different. I tell you, it was very segregated then.
Hmm. Okay.
See, this was deep south,
Yeah. Right.
and it was very different. I can remember going. Uh, this was after you wanted about Alabama.
Yeah.
This was not at the time because we had to have our meals out. You see, I had no way to cook
Wow.
or for that. That was for the summer. We knew that was only temporary because then I would be going home to teach again for the next year.
Oh, okay. Huh.
Um, so anyway, uh, where was I going? Oh, you asked me what it was like living in Alabama, and I said it was very segregated.
Yeah.
I I can remember saying to Harold, "Now, if I get on a bus, uh, I have to sit in the front of the bus, don't I?" And he said, "Yes."
Wow.
You know, and later on, when we had our little house that was down there, after summer, I went back. Uh, we had this little house, and I had to half a house, I should say. And I can remember going into a butcher shop one time. There were no supermarkets in those days.
Oh, wow.
You went to a grocery store, you went to a butcher store. You didn't have supermarkets were not uh, invented, shall I say then.
Wow.
Uh, so anyway, I can remember going into this butcher shop, and people were waiting to be waited on, and there were black people and white people. Uh, so I can remember the butcher saying to me, "Okay, I guess you're next." And I said, "No, this lady was here before me, who was a black lady. Now, would you have done that?
Yeah.
Was there before you?"
Yeah.
And the other white women there looked at me like that
Wow.
was a nice experience.
Wow. So did they
I
make you
mean,
go next?
I guess I was so upset about getting, that I don't remember whether I did or he took her. I'm not sure.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, but it was emotional to me because I'm not, I wasn't used to that.
No, no.
She was there before me, and
Yeah.
she's next in line.
Wow.
Another time when I went down, uh, it wasn't just for a summer. It was I decided. Oh, that was after I had a miscarriage. I mean, I wanted to have a baby, and Harold said, "But suppose I don't come home. You'll be a single mother with a baby." And I said to him, the reason I got him to change his mind and say, I said, "But then I'd have part of you. If I had a child, I'd have part of you." Uh, So, there were so many decisions that had to be made then. So it wasn't easy always. Who knows what would happen when he was overseas?
Yeah. Did you know many people who didn't come back?
Uh, not I knew a few.
Mm.
He didn't think it was fair to me. I said, yes, it is. So we discussed this quite a while.
Yeah.
I came back pregnant and I had a miscarriage.
Oh.
So we didn't have that baby. I had two miscarriages before.
Oh,
One
wow.
of them while I was there in Alabama with Harold,
Uh-huh.
and I had called a local doctor, see, and this local doctor said, "You go to the Army hospital."
Oh.
So I went to the Army hospital. They kept me there for a number of days,
Oh.
and I thought, "Oh golly, what?" So I said, I'll quit." But well, my doctor said, "If you really want to have a child, don't think you can go on working now." I went down and I'd come back and I'd go down and come back. So it was not really 2.5 years altogether, but not in one stretch always.